All right, good afternoon for those of you who are following along from the East Coast, and good evening, good morning to others. This is the third piece of the Bitcoin for Corporations segment that we're hosting at MicroStrategy World.now. Thank you all who are joining us and who have joined the first two segments. Hopefully by now, after hearing Ross and Mike talk about the why of Bitcoin, and then after hearing Mike talk about the how a corporation might invest in Bitcoin, you're getting pretty excited. And probably at this point, you're wondering, okay, what do I do next? And that's what this segment is really about. It's about the what. What are the steps? What are the things you need to think through from a finance perspective, a legal, a governance perspective? Another way to think about this segment is, as you know, I've thought about it, is what did I wish I knew about a year ago when we went through this journey of investing a significant part of MicroStrategy's balance sheet in Bitcoin and treating it as our primary treasury reserve asset. So we'll go through a playbook. We've actually open sourced a lot of our documents now on our Bitcoin channel on our MicroStrategy World.now site on MicroStrategy.com. So if you want to pull up the Bitcoin project roadmap document, you can follow along a little bit. We also have some slides here that high level you can also follow along through. Before I get fully started, my name is Phong Lee. I'm the president and CFO of MicroStrategy, and had a big role in helping form the strategy for Bitcoin at MicroStrategy and also deliver on it. And I have here with me Jeremy Price. Jeremy, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Phong. Hi, I'm Jeremy Price, MicroStrategy Senior Vice President of Financial Planning and Analysis at MicroStrategy. I also serve as the company's head of Treasury and Investor Relations. I've been with the company a little over 18 years, and I've had various positions in finance and consulting and operations. Most recently, I've been a part of the executive team leading the development and execution effort of our balance sheet strategy, which includes our investment in Bitcoin.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. If you didn't follow along there, Jeremy, in his roles over at Treasury, IR, and FP&A, pretty much ran a large portion of the financial side of our investment in Bitcoin. So let me jump in and just sort of walk everyone through the phases that we went through. The document you see in front of you that's available on our website is a bit genericized, but it really does follow most of the steps that we, MicroStrategy, went through in this process. And I think it'd be very beneficial for all of you who are considering something similar. You heard Mike talk about all the different ways to invest in Bitcoin, whether it be a P&L strategy, whether it be a balance sheet strategy. We're going to primarily focus on the balance sheet section here, which is what a lot of other publicly traded companies are looking at. And so we'll walk through it top down. But the first piece, before you really start anything, is you really want to figure out what is your purpose, right? You know, is this a P&L strategy? Is it a balance sheet strategy? Do you want Bitcoin to be your primary treasury reserve asset? Do you want it to be a portion of your investment? Do you want to get into Bitcoin mining? Do you want to run a Bitcoin node? Do you want to get on the blockchain? Do you want blockchain analytics or blockchain technology to be part of what you want to do? And this is really a conversation that needs to happen at the executive level, right? It's a major strategic initiative for a company. And for us, we had these discussions with Mike, with myself, the rest of the executive team, and the board. And you'll see as we go along here, getting that level of alignment is critical. And so getting the alignment on the overall strategy is really the first piece here. And maybe, Jeremy, you can shed light on what exactly is MicroStrategy's strategy. A lot of you who are listening probably already know, but it's probably useful for those who are not as familiar with how we're treating Bitcoin overall.
Yeah, Phong, thanks. We decided on a balance sheet strategy and made Bitcoin our primary treasury reserve asset. What does that mean? We basically converted all of our cash to Bitcoin. We converted our excess cash flows into Bitcoin. We will convert our excess cash flows into Bitcoin. And we've also acquired debt and converted that cash into Bitcoin. And so the balance sheet strategy is a buy and hold strategy. It's different than choosing the operational model or the P&L strategy. For example, mining Bitcoin or using it in our day-to-day operations. It's a very straightforward approach that we felt made the most sense for us, given the company is a business intelligence company, and the vast majority of our employees, 2,000 or so, are focused on developing business intelligence products and supporting our customers.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you made there. Even though this is a pretty fundamental part of our strategy and our valuation, it doesn't have to be that distracting, right? You want the executive team, you want the board aligned. But of 2,000 employees in our company, probably 5 FTEs were able to pull this all off in a fairly short period of time. And that gets into this next piece. What is the internal team, right? Who is really going to work on this so that you can go move quickly, nimbly, but also have all the right experts in place. And in this case, you want to know who the champion is. In our case, it was Mike. As you probably all know, Mike Saylor, our CEO, was our champion. You want to get a finance working team together. You need the CFO in place. That's myself, Chief Accounting Officer. You want somebody who's responsible for SEC reporting. If you're a public company, you want your treasurer. You want somebody representing tax, internal audit, investor relations. All those pieces are pretty important, and there are all dimensions that you need to be aware of and work through. Also getting a legal team in place, right? Our general counsel, who you hear from later, Ming Shao, critical from a legal perspective. Having attorneys on the corporate side and also attorneys on the contract side lined up. And then there's an important and sometimes not thought about component, which is your technology team or your IT team. In that particular case, your CIO and or your CISO need to be involved because there are security matters and risks that arise with an investment in Bitcoin also. And then bringing that team together, talking about the purpose, talking about the objectives, and they're really starting to lay out a timeline and a roadmap, right? Like with any major project that you take on as a corporation, you want to have a timeline and a roadmap in place. Who owns what are the key activities? Jeremy, maybe it's useful for you to shed some light on the timeline that MicroStrategy went through.
Yeah, the timeline. There's a lot going into the planning effort, but the timeline, I think it took about 4 months for the planning phase, and it includes all the things that Phong just talked about, getting alignment on strategy and identifying the team, and getting a sense for the types of things that you're going to be tackling. And during that time, obviously, it became clear for MicroStrategy that Bitcoin was the asset class with the best store value and upside. So we had made our decision. And once we were aligned on that strategy and the overall plan, I think it probably took about 2 months for us to complete the process of executing, whether it be board approvals, executing on the plans for governance, finance, and IT considerations, and onboarding our vendors and being able to acquire Bitcoin.
Great. And the final, I'd say, pre-planning step, if you will, now that you have your strategy in place, you've got your internal team in place, it's really getting a team of advisors in place. And this is pretty critical. There are probably in the number of dozens, not hundreds of people in the US who work in the intersection of Bitcoin and of corporate law and of corporate accounting and finance, who really have been working in this space for a long time, call it 5-10 years. You'll hear from some of them later today on the legal side and on the accounting side, but you really want to talk to and work with folks who have done this a few times before, who aren't learning it for the first time. And so on the finance side, on the legal side, you want to have corporate governance attorneys who can advise you. You want to have regulatory and SEC attorneys who can advise you, and the contracts folks. You may have some folks in the house, but here I'd recommend, unless you sort of have people who are really niche and expert in these areas, it's worth going outside and finding folks also to help you out as you undertake this. On the finance side, you want to have some accounting advisors, right? You'll hear from some later today. Tax advisors, folks who understand internal controls as it relates to cryptocurrency, treasury. And then your auditor, right? Like, those who are public companies, you have an auditor, and you want to make sure they're aligned too. And so those are all pretty key pieces. In addition, if you're thinking about investing in a fund, or if you're thinking about raising equity or debt as a strategy also included in here, you'll want to have some bankers involved. And so getting this team together and defining your strategy, getting the team together, really then lays out all the rest of the steps that you go through from here. And it's something that you definitely don't want to short shrift. It's something that you want to think through fairly thoroughly. The next set of steps that we'll talk about is corporate governance. And in this particular case, we'll go a lot deeper in the next session, which is Bitcoin legal considerations. But at a high level, you want to make sure you go through all the steps to inform yourselves, conduct your fiduciary responsibilities, get the board on board. First thing is just do some research, right? Like you may think you know a lot about Bitcoin, which is awesome, but not everyone that's on the team may know a lot about Bitcoin, right? And there'll be varying degrees of knowledge. The awesome part is there's a ton of very good research and documentation, whether it be from large banks, well-respected publications, to YouTube, to Twitter, to articles written all over the place, and including those things that are published by publicly traded companies. We, as I mentioned, have a lot of our materials now available on our website. Also, we have a Bitcoin portion of our website that is more geared towards MicroStrategy and what we've done, but is also a useful resource. And what you really want to do is bundle up the best things and get everyone up to speed, not just on sort of Bitcoin for corporations, but the background of Bitcoin, right? Like assign them some reading. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's good to get everyone on the same footing. And the other thing that you do by doing this, and as many of you know, is once you've done the research and once you've gone deep, it is very intellectually stimulating. And most people, by the time they've gone through it, understand and are big advocates of Bitcoin. So you'll have a team of people not only who are well read and well understood, but who now are also driving and all rowing in the same direction. You'll want to put that stuff together and start to summarize also your investment strategies in the past, right? You want to talk about how does Bitcoin fit into what has happened in the past, right? What are some of the key considerations that then you can use to facilitate board and management decisions and get people on board? And it's there is almost a light bulb, a switch that flips when people start really saying, "Oh, this makes complete sense." Sort of like what Michael and Ross have been through, right? Like there is an education process. Some it takes minutes, some it takes hours, some it takes days, some it takes weeks, usually not months. But when that flip switches, you'll have an team of advocates who are ready to move forward and really just completely change how you look at your business and your treasury strategy. From a regulatory perspective, you want to put together all the key regulatory considerations. When you start thinking about how you are going to invest, which we'll talk about a little bit later, there are things that might come up, such as Investment Company Act implications, considerations that you want to go through. And then you also want to look at conflicts of interest, right? You know, one thing that you'll find out, which will surprise you maybe, is as you start looking at the team and asking, so do you own Bitcoin? People will surface and say, oh yeah, I've had Bitcoin since 2013. I've had Bitcoin since 2015. Those are considerations when you start getting active into the Bitcoin market and start to trade, to purchase, either through funds or directly. You'll want to know who has what and what conflicts may exist also. Maybe this is a good time to segue quickly into the actual documents that we've made available. And Jeremy, if you don't mind, just list off what we made available in terms of open source and redacted documents from our Bitcoin work.
Yeah, we shared 7 documents with everyone to help them develop their Bitcoin strategy and get a feel for what it takes. The documents are on the landing page on the Bitcoin for Corporations section of the world.now site. The first provides a summary of the key considerations for corporate investments in Bitcoin. It correlates very nicely with the track that Michael just wrapped up before this. The second, which we're talking about right now, is really focused on the project roadmap. You know, what are the things you need to do? It gives you a playbook for the major phases and next steps to consider in developing and executing the Bitcoin strategy. The remaining documents are best suited to address a number of governance, finance, and IT considerations. So the third document is the Treasury Reserve Policy that provides a framework for implementing and managing corporate treasury with Bitcoin as the primary treasury reserve asset. It includes examples of how to define what cash will be used for investing and who is designated to approve transactions, what employees are authorized to carry out the management of the policy. security protocols, and other key governance considerations. The fourth document is the Bitcoin trading policy, which provides a framework for thinking of conflicts of interest, use of corporate information in personal transactions involving Bitcoin. You'll also see examples of who's impacted by the trading policy, what constitutes material non-public information, and the like. So the fifth is contractual considerations for digital asset custodians, in which you find essential information in establishing a relationship with a custodian of your Bitcoin. And any company that plans to acquire Bitcoin should consider their holding their digital assets in custody, which is considered cold or offline storage, not connected to the internet. Custody is the equivalent of a bank vault to store your assets. The legal team will talk more about the policy and contractual considerations in their session after this. The final two documents provide a framework for accounting and tax related to Bitcoin. The document provides insight into Bitcoin controls, balance sheet accounting, how to measure Bitcoin value and evaluate it for impairment, how to account for the sale of it, and ultimately, the implications, the accounting implications of the investment. So Phong will talk a little bit more with the Deloitte team about that. There's a document from Deloitte as well that talks specifically to the tax considerations.
Great. I've received questions quite often as to why are we doing this? Why are we making all of our work that we spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in advisor fees and our own time putting together? And there's really two reasons. One, we as a corporation are very bullish on Bitcoin. We believe it is the future for many corporations in a P&L strategy, but even before that, a balance sheet strategy. And there's really no reason why every publicly traded company in the U.S. and more so the world shouldn't at least have some of their treasury in Bitcoin, if not all of it. And to help with that vision and that belief, these documents can really spearhead the efforts, and so can these sessions. And the only thing I'd wish is that they were here, when we started this process close to a year ago. The other thing is it's very consistent with the ethos of Bitcoin and of cryptocurrency, which is to open source and to share openly the work that we've done. And that's important to us. And we believe in that in terms of a worldwide currency. We believe in that in terms of what MicroStrategy, the company, does. If you think about our software too, right? We provide, we're an independent BI company that believes in opening up our platform so that we are not platform dependent, we are not source system dependent. We let people access our code via APIs, etc. It's very consistent with what we believe in financially, we believe in from a corporate strategy, and we'll continue to do. And I guess the third reason is a bunch of folks in public and private companies have asked us for the documents, and we said, well, why don't you sign an NDA and maybe we can share with you what we've done, or we can just make it available to everyone. So we're excited that we're doing it, and hopefully you all find it useful too. Let me go on to the next phase, and this one is very close to me and close to Jeremy too, I know, which is really the finance and the IT pieces of planning. Here, there's a lot of analysis to be done, and as you can look at our accounting memo, it's quite thorough, and that was a big part of what we needed to do, which is to understand how we should account for Bitcoin. There is GAAP precedent that we'll talk about later. But there's specific situations that every company, ourselves included, get into. So you need to understand the accounting considerations, a lot of thoughts around tax, right? Whether you, sort of have a loss or a gain on your Bitcoin on your balance sheet, how do you tax for that? And then intercompany and border, movement of money and Bitcoin also has tax implications. Internal controls is a big one. As we work with other providers, whether it be exchanges, whether it be custodies, whether it be custodians, whether it be funds, making sure that they have all their right controls in place, SOC 1, SOC 2 reporting, and all those types of things have to be considered. Also, I'd mentioned considering the Investment Company Act and seeing that applies to you. Whether the company and what company entity to use as an investment vehicle, that's important to know. And also, looking at audited financials at the Bitcoin vendors and partners that you're going to be working with. So a lot of analysis to do on the finance side before you make that first investment into Bitcoin. And then also, where's the money coming from? Right? What are the sources of funds? What funding needs may you have? Are there sources of funds onshore, offshore? Do you need to repatriate cash to be able to invest in Bitcoin? Both of these areas, I'll call it the accounting, tax, treasury analyses, are not much different than opening a new bank account, right? They're akin to that, or they're also similar to if you were to decide to invest into a new treasury asset, invest into a corporate bond, invest into a fund, but they come with an additional layer of learning. And that's where having advisors in place who sort of have done this before are very important. The IT side, sometimes people don't think about, right? Like the reality is when you as a corporation, public company, are to invest in something like Bitcoin, you're going to raise your profile. And in doing so, your social profile, your security profile. And so you have to think about what are the IT risks, what are the security risks, is your IT network and infrastructure, is it resilient, right? Like you may be subject to more external attacks, potentially a DDoS attack, phishing attacks. Do you have those right pieces in place? Have you thought about that? Impersonation. And so you want to work with your hosting providers, ISPs, cloud providers, and you want to do pen tests. You want to have some security partners in place, right? So you don't want that to be an afterthought after you made an investment in Bitcoin and you find that some bad actors have thought and found out about you and want to do something to try to either access your corporate network, disrupt your network, or even get to your Bitcoin somehow. So an important consideration that sometimes organizations overlook. And then the next one, we get questions all the time, right? What is the insurance landscape like out there for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? And Jeremy, I know you spent a lot of time getting to understand the landscape. Maybe you can share with the audience some of what you learned in the process.
Yeah, Phong. Thanks. The first question we asked was, is there such a thing as Bitcoin insurance? And I think everyone will be relieved to know that obviously there is indeed a market for Bitcoin insurance. I think first you should start with your custodian, who should be providing some sort of coverage. While custodians may not insure all of your Bitcoin, depending on how much you're investing, they should offer liability coverage that will protect you in the event of loss, typically with respect to issues that occur from within the custodial services company. When discussing insurance with a custodian, you want to focus on key exclusions, as policies often carve out certain issues from coverage. You also want to make sure you're added as an additional insured on each custodian's policy and make sure that you see the endorsements so you know what you qualify for. You should expect that the custodian will provide at least some insurance coverage as part of the service they're providing. You shouldn't be paying an upcharge for the basic coverage. And it's important to note that, the custodian's insurance is not going to pay for or won't provide coverage for bad actors or theft or negligence arising from within your own organization. In order to get that type of coverage, you're going to need to acquire supplemental insurance. You can expect that custodians would have arrangements with insurance carriers or relationships that can offer that supplemental insurance, and they might be able to introduce you to some of those brokers. This type of insurance program is typically called a specie program, and the insurance market for Bitcoin is still in its nascent stages. But and as a result of that, the costs are relatively high to other corporate insurance programs. So you should know that going in. For supplemental insurance, you should work with your broker, but you're likely to focus your time on your crime policy, your cyber policy, and your D&O policies. And as Phong's mentioned a few times now, you'll want advice from an expert or multiple experts on what's best for you and your company, depending on the amount of your investment and the transaction risk associated with your Bitcoin and governance practices. I focused most of the commentary on custodians. It's also possible to get insurance on hot wallets or wallets that are connected to the internet, often associated with exchange wallets. But we don't really recommend holding your Bitcoin in hot wallets in the long term. And you can expect that the cost of insurance on those hot wallets will be even higher than the custody wallets.
Thanks, Jeremy. All right, so next step, big one. For us, it was big. Investor relations strategy, public relations, communications, announcements, disclosures, SEC disclosures. You really want to think through, what do you want to communicate? Through whom do you want to communicate? What channels and how? When we announced our Bitcoin strategy, we were the first major corporation to have invested in Bitcoin. Now, there's a little bit more safety in numbers, MicroStrategy, Square, MassMutual, other crypto-specific public companies. And so the waters are a little bit warmer, but you still want to understand, especially with your existing set of investors, how you want to communicate to them, because they may be looking for something different, expecting something different. So this is an important part here to get out to your analysts and investors proactively as you do this. But I think you'll get a more receptive audience and a more knowledgeable audience than you may have in the past, especially with the interest that we've seen in Bitcoin and corporations in the last, I'll call it 6 months or so. And then the final big decision, and this is an important one, is how do you want to invest? You go direct and want to own and hold your own Bitcoin through a broker and through a custodian, and that's what MicroStrategy has done. Or through several brokers and several custodians, or do you want to do it through a fund? There's time to market and probably ease of accounting if you work through a fund, and if you work through a broker and several custodians, then you have more control of your Bitcoin. All right, you have more control of whether you want a buy and hold strategy, a buy and sell strategy, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty important, and the answer could be both, right? You could have a diversified portfolio. Is it Bitcoin only, or is it other cryptos, right? We chose Bitcoin only because we believe it is the superior cryptocurrency and is the dominant one, but you may want to have others, you may want to hedge, and that may be appropriate too. So that's sort of a finance and IT planning phase, and a pretty important one. The next one is as critical, which is really your vendors and partners. And so we talked about your advisors. Now you have to go through your vendors and partners. And this is almost like a typical vendor selection and contracting process. But you don't want to run it with sort of the typical procurement organization. You really want to run it with your leadership. Deciding who your brokers are, who your custodians may be, what funds you want to work with, what banks you want to work with. Your advisors can help here, but this is a very personal decision. And in doing so, there are a lot of considerations, not just reputation of the firms, longevity of the firms. Jeremy talked about insurance considerations, but their trading platform, how easy is the technology to use? Those are just a few. Jeremy led our vendor selection process. You want to talk about some of the other key considerations?
Yeah, Phong. So, there are a number of considerations as Phong's outlined, but I'll highlight just a few that I think are really essential in the process. First, you need to consider the capabilities of the service provider, and you want to make sure that they offer the services that you need, or they align with your strategy. And whatever combination of those service providers you select, you'll want to make sure that it fits your strategy. You want to determine if the service providers offer trading services, and if they're a part of an exchange for kind of the ease of transacting. Does the service provider also provide custody services? And are they providing kind of an institutional grade offline storage and key management product with reliable controls? Does the service provider offer a trading desk so you can contact them to execute trades on your behalf and just bringing them to you for settlement? You may want to also consider additional services such as lending, staking, other ancillary services that might be of interest to you in the future. And you should take the time to understand what each provider offers and ensure that you select one that fits your strategy. Second factor is price. Usually there's a trading fee to transact, which means buying and selling. And in this world, it's making and taking is the lingo. But if you're paying 20 basis points per transaction, you're paying 40 basis points in total, because you're going to buy and you're going to sell at some point. So in addition to the transaction fee, you're going to be paying for custody services, typically in the form of an annual fee on your assets under management. You also want to address specifics with each service provider to make sure there aren't hidden fees. And my advice would be to negotiate pretty aggressively on pricing. Institutional investors are just starting to enter this market, and there's a significant room for savings on these fees. Third consideration would be around security capabilities, right? Get to know the security protocols for each provider. Do they have multi-factor authentication when you're signing into accounts? Are they able to support multi-approver protocols for transactions so one person can't unilaterally approve everything from funding to cashing out, for example? Does the service provider have their SOC 1, Type 1, and 2 certifications so that they can demonstrate for your audit team that they have controls and for data management, and that those controls are actually effective? These will be very important when you're working with your auditors to validate your internal controls. And I think the last thing that I'd mention is, insurance. I talked a little bit about this before, and I won't dwell on it now, but you should definitely focus on that as part of your strategy.
All right, Jeremy Price giving advice on pushing your vendors hard on price. It's an important point here. If you're a major corporation who's looking to invest in Bitcoin, you're still early in the game. All of the vendors you'll hear from tomorrow want you as a customer, and going early means you're sort of trailblazing, but it also means that you have the ability to find the perfect partner and ask for the right pricing. And when you find that right partner, it's really just a great relationship going forward, which we've had the good fortune of having with all the partners that we work with. Okay, so we've completed this planning phase. There's really a couple of things you want to do now. You want to update your project roadmap, key timelines, actions, owners. As you're going to get into the execution phase, things start moving pretty quickly. And this is a good time that we found to have a board meeting, one formal board meeting, to lay out all the research that was done, to talk about, how you may want to invest in Bitcoin. You may not need formal board resolutions at this point, but you really want to have a robust, lengthy board discussion on all the work and why you're moving in this direction, why the strategy, what the execution plan looks like, and get their support to continue to move forward with really then what we'll get into next is the execution phase. And, I sort of split this into two parts. It's just there's a lot of things to happen here, but this is the fun part. You just sort of go one by one and go through each of these pieces. First, prepare your treasury policy, right? And we have a sample of what our treasury reserve policy is that we've open sourced. But what do you want to talk about here? First of all, assuming you already have some sort of a treasury policy, this could be an addition to it or amendment to it, but you want to talk about, all right, so how much can the company invest in Bitcoin? Through what means? What are the transaction procedures? What are the prohibited activities? Buy and hold, active trading, hedging, what are your brokerage and custodial arrangements? You want to get that all right in a very robust treasury policy, because this is the policy by which you will start executing your strategic moves on a go-forward basis. Second is your trading policy. The difference here is each trade will be governed by this policy, right? What are your non-trading periods, right? Like to prevent potential conflicts of interest. Who can trade, right? In our cases, we have a short list of people who can move money from our bank accounts to our exchange accounts. Short list of people who can move money from our exchange accounts to our custodial accounts, and back and forth. And like you do it with your bank policies, you typically have 3 or 4 people who can do it, and you need at least 2 people authorizing some of those movements. Those are the kinds of things you want to put in your trading policy. And similarly, as you identify people who are officers, directors, et cetera, who might already hold Bitcoin, you want to make sure that you don't have any conflicts of interest. You may want to have closed periods, just like when you're trading your own publicly traded stock. You're going to want to have closed periods for trading Bitcoin too. So having a very robust trading policy and a treasury reserve policy, once you put those things together, the execution then beyond this can be quite seamless. But thinking that through thoroughly is quite important. Of course, then you want to negotiate your brokerage and custodial agreements. Jeremy talked about the pricing, making sure you get that right, levels of service, types of trade. Can you pick up the phone and call somebody at any hour of the day? Right, Bitcoin is extraordinarily a 24/7 network. You could trade any hour of the day. Can your broker support that, right? And is that live? Is it through a electronic feed? How do you make pricing decisions? Those are all the types of things that you want to put in there. What are the limitations? How much can you trade per day? How much can you withdraw per day? Those are all things that you want to have in there. Who are the points of contact within your organization, within your brokerage organization? So these are things that I think are more precedented when you think about traditional securities trading. When you talk about Bitcoin trading, there are less precedents in the institutional world, and you want to make sure you get all those things right up front. And then you want to set up the accounts, your brokerage account, your custodial account, your fund accounts. And that is an important step too. It's not as simple as, well, setting up a bank account is actually quite complex for a corporation. So it's a little more simple than that, but there's a lot about, how do you transact? Jeremy, you want to go through some of those details for us?
Yeah, sure. In terms of transacting, right? I mean, it's really important that you get feedback from your experts on what to expect, right, and how things are going to be done. We couldn't have acted as quickly and with as much conviction or as efficiently as we did without our experts and our partners. You need to consider how and who will execute the process of carrying out the Bitcoin strategy, right? You need to find reliable, accessible employees that you trust that need to be part of the process. I think third, you need to focus on the segregation of duties and controls and how you're going to execute on all of your transacting and the management of the assets. And I think from a controls perspective, it's extremely important. And then, we realized early on that one thing we thought was, or that in retrospect, we think is really important is using a trading desk to execute, especially since we had limited experience executing crypto trades. I'd highly recommend that type of service for institutions contemplating acquiring Bitcoin in any significant quantity.
Awesome. And then you want to decide internally who's going to be responsible for transacting, make sure they're fully trained on the platform, do some test transactions, make sure you actually know how this works so that, your first big trade, whatever it is, $1 million, $10 million, $20 million, isn't the first time, right? And it's a lot of fun, but you just want to make sure everyone knows exactly what they're getting into here. And then the last big document is the accounting memo. How are you going to account for this, right? And we'll go through this in nitty-gritty detail in about an hour and a half or so. So I won't go into that too far. You have our accounting memo or version of it out on our website. But think about it, there's 3 big documents, right, that you need to make sure are in place and well thought through. Treasury reserve policy, trading policy, and accounting memo. A lot of work here, but it'll be very satisfying, gratifying work because it really lays the groundwork for how to think about this as a corporation on a go-forward basis. Next set of items, execution phase, part 2. I talked earlier about IT and systems. Make sure you have the right defenses, changes in place. Make sure that you're ready for anything that might happen in terms of bad actors coming into the organization. You may already have some of these things in place. We just want to retest them, ramp them up, have monitoring in place too. And then you want to go obtain your insurance. Jeremy talked about this. Insurance via your custodian, insurance via your fund, cybersecurity insurance, D&O insurance. Make sure that all those are all in the right place and everyone feels good about it. And then start putting together your SEC disclosures, right? And there could be quite a few, right? Depending on the materiality of the decision that you're about to make. 8Ks, 10Qs, 10Ks, etc. These are all things that you want to work through and think through, and they'll follow in large part some of the things that you've done in your accounting memo too. And then your communication strategy, right? We talked about investor relations, but also employee communications. Your employees may wonder, okay, so what exactly are you doing? Why are you doing it? For those who are less well-versed in Bitcoin and whose knowledge might be, circa 2008, they'll ask questions, about sort of the more seedy side of historically cryptocurrencies, and you want to be proactive. One thing we did is some of the education documents that we made available on our website. We made that not just available for all you, but available for our employees too, right? And so getting employees well-versed in what Bitcoin means and cryptocurrency means. And typically, just like with our stakeholders, employees spend a couple of hours on this and become fascinated and very interested, and they're like, this makes complete sense. investor relations we talked about, and then public relations, right? What proactive communication channels do you want to use? What I love about this part of the world, when you get into cryptocurrency, into Bitcoin, the public relations channels are quite modern, right? Think Twitter, think YouTube, think Medium, and things like that, blogs. And so you don't have to rely on, print communications. You don't have to rely on your traditional PR firms who may actually not be very familiar with the space and know what to do. Here you can use ingenuity, creativity, and start to modernize the image of your company, not just in how it invests, from a treasury side, but also how you communicate out to all the different constituents. And you can really play around with this and have a lot of fun, especially on Twitter. So good things that can happen as you think through your communication strategy. And then you prepare for your big board meeting where approvals are going to be made, right? Associated committee meeting documents, resolutions, conduct the board meeting, go through investment committee, audit committee meetings, approve the treasury reserve policy or the treasury policy, approve the BTC trading policy, approve the accounting policy, usually through an audit committee, approve and agree on brokers, custodians, clear any conflicts of interest. Once you've gotten through this execution phase, this is a big one, but once those approvals are done, you're sort of off and running and ready to go and start to talk about your initial foray into Bitcoin. And that's really then you get into the post-execution phase, right? So once you've done it once, how often are you going to do it? What's the timing? What's the frequency? Making sure you have a nice treasury plan in place for subsequent Bitcoin purchases. What do you do as a communication basis going forward? And then you start to trade. And after 6 months of having done this, couldn't be more thrilled that we did, and couldn't be more thrilled to share with all of you our playbook. So with that said, any closing remarks, Jeremy? Lessons learned, ahas from your experience through this process, other than you got to know me way too well?
I already knew you way too well enough. Okay, so yeah, I think there are a couple. So for me, first point would be, don't go it alone, right? We started our journey knowing very little. We learned quite a bit, but we learned even more with the experts that we brought in to consult with us. And I think that the knowledge we gained from each other, just not the one-way communication, but the knowledge that we gained and that we gave to our experts even, we all learned. And it was an invaluable experience for both parties, and created kind of a community, and starts to feel a little bit more like a community as we went through the process. I think that, as far as adapting and adjusting to the needs and improving our policies, like we worked very well together. I think it was very important for us to get it right, to have that ecosystem. I think also we learned that, the Bitcoin investment community is pretty tech savvy, pretty modern, and it's a great fit for MicroStrategy. In 2020, MicroStrategy rode the virtual wave, shifting, our digital marketing and sales efforts or to a digital marketing and sales platform. We took advantage of online collaboration and work tools, working remote in a forum just like this. And we adopted a digital asset class as our primary treasury reserve asset. I think all of those things have helped the company tremendously, improving margins and value for shareholders. And I think the investment community sees that and has responded to that. And it's not something we necessarily were sure everybody was going to respond to. We thought that they would, and we were very pleased that we did. So, my advice for other corporations would also be that this is a journey, and you need to set your course and put your plan together, but you need to be agile enough to adapt and change course throughout. It's not easy to make that initial leap, but if you put the work in, hopefully with some of the information that we're providing and examples we're sharing and the growing ecosystem here, it gets a lot easier to start and complete the journey. And I think what I'd say is that the key to it all is really just getting started.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for the time. And let me build on a couple of your lessons learned first. And this builds on what Ross and Mike also said. If you believe your company is going through a digital transformation, and as I said, as I kicked off MicroStrategy World, you need to, because that will be what differentiates you against your competition. And your digital transformation has really just started with your P&L strategy and your products and your services. That's part one. Every company, every major corporation at this point in time also needs to digitally transform your balance sheet and your treasury policies. And Bitcoin is the way to do that. It is not something that comes immediately to mind for every corporation. But when you take the time to do the research, to understand the macroeconomic impacts, the digital impacts, the global impacts, et cetera, it is very much, you're either sort of immediately get it or you gradually get it. And as people gradually get it, a light bulb goes off and they suddenly get it. And then you dive in and it's a great thrill. It brings great value to your organization, to your employees, to your shareholders, to your stakeholders, and to your customers. And it's something that everyone should be considering and then very quickly doing. And thank you for all your time. We'll be back in a little bit at the top of the hour to talk about the legal considerations. And trust me, you may say, oh, legal considerations, this isn't going to be fun. It's thrilling, it's enthralling, and it's more you ever want to know than you'll ever want to know about Bitcoin legal considerations, but it'll be highly entertaining. Thank you, everyone.